Pol Pot was a Cambodian revolutionary dictator and politician who ruled Cambodia as Prime Minister of the Democratic Kampuchea between 1976 and 1979. Ideologically a Marxist-Leninist and a khomer ethno-nationalist, he was a leading member of Cambodia's communist movement, the Khmer Rouge, from 1963 until 1997, and he served as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Kampuchea from 1963 to 1991. His administration converted Cambodia into a one-party communist state and perpetrated the Cambodian genocide. Born to a prosperous farmer in Prek Subao, French Cambodia, Pol Pot was educated at some of Cambodia's most elite schools. While in Paris during the 1940s, he joined the French Communist Party, returning to Cambodia in 1953. He involved himself in the Khmer Viet Minh organization and its guerrilla war against King Norodom Sihanouk's newly independent government. Following the Khmer Viet Minh's 1954 retreat into North Vietnam, Pol Pot returned to Phnom Penh, working as a teacher while remaining a central member of the Cambodia's Marxist-Leninist movement. In 1959, he helped formalize the movement into the Kampuchean Labour Party, which was later renamed the Communist Party of Kampuchea (CPK). To avoid state repression, in 1962 he relocated to a jungle encampment, and in 1963 became the CPK's leader. In 1968, he relaunched the war against the Sihanouk's government. After the Lon Nols ousted Sihanouk in 1970 coup, Pol Pot's forces sided with the deposed leader against the new government, which was bolstered by the United States military aided by the Viet Cong militia and the North Vietnamese troops. Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge forces advanced and controlled all of Cambodia by 1975. Pol Pot transformed Cambodia into a one-party state which he called Democratic Kampuchea, seeking to create an agrarian socialist society that he believed will evolve into a communist society. Pol Pot's government forcibly relocated the urban population to the countryside and forced it to work on collective farms. Pursuing complete egalitarianism, money was abolished and all citizens were forced to wear the same black clothing. Mass killings of perceived government opponents coupled with the malnutrition and poor medical care killed between 1.5 and 2 million people, approximately a quarter of Cambodia's population, a process which was later termed the Cambodian genocide. Repeated purges of the CPK generated growing discontent. By 1978, Cambodian soldiers were mounting a rebellion in the east. After several years of border clashes, the newly unified Vietnam invaded Cambodia in December 1978, toppling Pol Pot and installing a rival government. In 1979, the Khmer Rouge retreated to the jungles near the Thai border, from where they continued to fight in declining health. Pol Pot stepped back from many of his roles in the movement. In 1998, the Khmer Rouge commander Ta Mok placed Pol Pot under house arrest, and shortly afterward Pol Pot died. Taking power at the height of global communism's impact, Pol Pot proved to be divisive to the international communist movement. Many claimed that he deviated from the orthodox Marxism-Leninism, but China supported his government as a bulwark against Soviet influence in Southeast Asia. He was widely denounced internationally for his role in the Cambodian genocide, and he was also regarded as a totalitarian dictator who was guilty of crimes against humanity. Pol Pot was born in the village of Prek Subao outside the city of Kampong Tom. He was named Salot Sa, the word Sa, white pale, referring his comparatively light-skin complexion. French colonial records placed his birth date on 25th May 1928, but biographer Philippe Short argues he was born in March 1925. While Sa was at the school, the King of Cambodia died. In 1941, the French authorities appointed Norodom Sihanouk as his replacement. A new junior middle school, the College Prim Sihanouk, was established in Kampong Cham, and Sa was elected as a boarder at the institution in 1942. This level of education afforded him a privileged position in the Cambodian society. He learned to play the violin and took part in school plays. Much of his spare time was spent playing football, soccer, and basketball. Several fellow pupils, among them whom Nim and Q Sampan, later served in his government. During the New Year vacation in 1945, Sa and several friends from his college theatre troupe went on a provisional tour in a bus to raise money for a trip to Angkor Wat. In 1947, he left the school. Access to further education abroad made Sa part of a tiny elite in Cambodia. He and 21 other selected students sailed from Saigon aboard the SS Jamaica, stopping at Singapore, Colombo, and Djibouti en route to Marseille. In January 1950, Sa enrolled at the École Française d'Électricité to study radio electronics. He took a room in the site Universitas Indochinese Pavilion, then lodgings en Rue Amiot, and eventually a bed seat on the corner of the Rue du Commerce and Rue Letelier. Sa earned good marks during his first year. He failed his first end-of-year exams but was allowed to retake them and narrowly passed, enabling him to continue his studies. Sai arrived in Saigon on 13th January 1953, the same day on which Siauk disbanded the democratic-controlled National Assembly, began ruling by decree, and imprisoned democratic members of parliament without trial. Amid the broader First Indochina War in neighboring French Indochina, Cambodia was in a civil war, with civilian massacres and other atrocities carried out by all sides. Sa spent several months at the headquarters of Prince Norodom Chantarengisi, the leader of one faction in Tropeng Rolyong, before moving to Phnom Penh, where he met fellow circle member Ping Say to discuss the situation. Sa regarded the Khmer Viet Minh, a mixed Vietnamese and Cambodian guerrilla subgroup of the North Vietnam-based Viet Minh, as the most promising resistance group. He believed Khmer Viet Minh's relationship to the Viet Minh, and thus the international movement made it the best group for the circle Marxists to support. The circle members in Paris took his recommendation. Cambodia's communists wanted to operate clandestinely but also established a socialist party, branching on to serve as a front organization through which they could compete in the 1955 election. Although Prancheon had strong support in some areas, most observers expected the Democratic Party to win. Sihanouk feared a Democratic Party government, and in March 1955 abdicated the throne in favor of his father, Norodom Saramadit. This allowed him to legally establish a political party, the Sangum Riast Nium, with which to contest the election. The September election witnessed widespread voter intimidation and electoral fraud, resulting in Sangum winning all 91 seats. Sihanouk's establishment of the de facto one-party state extinguished hopes that the Cambodian left could take power electorally. North Vietnam's government nevertheless urged the Khmer party not to restart the armed struggle. The former was focused on undermining South Vietnam and had little desire to destabilize Sihanouk's regime, given that it had conveniently for them remained internationally non-aligned rather than following the Thai and South Vietnamese governments in allying with the anti-communist United States. At a 1959 conference, the movement's leadership established the Kampuchean Labour Party based on Marxist-Leninist model of democratic centralism. Sa To, Somot, and Nun Chia were part of a four-man General Affairs Committee leading the party. Its existence was to be kept secret from non-members. The Kampuchean Labour Party's conference held clandestinely from September to October 1916 in Phnom Penh. So Somot became party secretary and Nun Chia is deputy, while Sa took the third senior position and Leng Sari the fourth. Conditions at the Viet Cong camp were basic and food scarce, as Sihanouk's government cracked down on the movement in Phnom Penh. Growing number of its members fled to join Sa at his jungle base. In February 1963, at the party's second conference held in Central Phnom Penh apartment, Sa was elected party secretary but soon fled into the jungle to avoid repression by Sihanouk's government. In early 1964, Sa established his own encampment office 100 on the South Vietnamese side of the border. The Viet Cong allowed these actions to be officially separate from its own, but still wielded significant control over his camp. At plenum of the party's central committee, it was agreed that they should re-emphasize their independence from Vietnamese control and endorse armed struggle against Sihanouk. In January 1968, the war was launched with an attack on the Bay Damran army post south of Battambang. Further attacks targeted police and soldiers and seized weaponry. The government responded with scorched-earth policies, aerially bombarding areas where rebels were active. The army's brutality aided the insurgents' cause as the uprising spread. Over 100,000 villagers joined them. In the summer, Sa relocated his base 48 kilometers north to the more mountainous Nagas Tail to avoid encroaching government troops. At this base called K5, he increased his dominance over the party and had his own separate encampment, staff and guards. No outsider was allowed to meet him without an escort. He took over from Sari as the secretary of the Northeast Zone. In November 1969, Sa trekked to Hanoi to persuade the North Vietnamese government to provide direct military assistance. They refused, urging him to revert to a political struggle. In January 1970, he flew to Beijing. There, his wife began showing early signs of the chronic paranoid schizophrenia she would later be diagnosed with. In March 1970, while Sa was in Beijing, Cambodian parliamentarians led by Lon Nol deposed Sihanouk when he was out of the country. Sihanouk also flew to Beijing, where the Chinese and the North Vietnamese Communist parties urged him to form an alliance with the Khmer Rouge to overthrow Lon Nol's right-wing government. Sihanouk agreed. On Zhou Enlai advice, Sa also agreed, although his dominant role in the CPK was concealed from Sihanouk. Sihanouk then formed his own government in exile in Beijing and launched the United National Front of Kampuchea to rally Lon Nol's opponents. Sihanouk's support for the Khmer Rouge helped greatly in recruitment, with the Khmer Rouge undergoing a massive expansion in size. Many of new recruits from the Khmer Rouge were political peasants who fought in support of the king, not for communism, of which they had little understanding. In early 1972, Pol Pot embarked on his first tour of the Marxist-controlled areas across Cambodia. In these areas, called liberated zones, corruption was stamped out, gambling was banned, and alcohol and extramarital affairs were discouraged. From 1970 to 1971, the Khmer Rouge had generally sought to cultivate good relations with the inhabitants, organizing local elections and assemblies. Some people regarded as hostile to the movement were executed, although this was uncommon. Private motor transport was requisitioned. Wealthier peasants had their land distributed so that by the end of 1972, all families living in the Marxist-controlled areas possessed an equal amount of land. The poorest strata of Cambodian society benefited from these reforms. In May 1973, Pol Pot ordered the collectivization of villages in the territory it controlled. This move was both ideological in that it built a socialist society void of private property and tactical, and that it allowed the Khmer Rouge greater control over the food supply, ensuring that farmers did not provision government forces. Many villages resented the collectivization and slaughtered their livestock and to prevent it from becoming collective property. Over the following 6 months, about 60,000 Cambodians fled from areas under Khmer Rouge control. The Khmer Rouge introduced conscription to bolster its forces. Relations between the Khmer Rouge and the North Vietnamese remained strained, and the latter temporarily reduced the flow of arms to Khmer Rouge. In July 1973, the CPK Central Committee agreed that the North Vietnamese should be considered a friend with the conflict. Pol Pot ordered the internment of many of Khmer Rouge who had spent time in North Vietnam and considered too sympathetic to them. Most of these people were later executed. On 28 April 1975, 3 days after Phnom Penh fell, Pol Pot secretly arrived in the abandoned city along with other Khmer Rouge leaders. He based himself in the railway station, which was easy to defend. In early May, they moved from their headquarters to the former Finance Ministry building. The party leadership soon held a meeting at the Silver Pagoda, where they agreed that raising agricultural production should be their government's top priority. Pol Pot declared that agriculture is key to both nation building and to national defense. He believes that unless Cambodia could develop swiftly, then it will be vulnerable to Vietnamese domination, as it had been in the past. Their goal was to reach 70 to 80% farm mechanization in 5 to 10 years, and a modern industrial base in 15 to 20 years. As a part of this project, Pol Pot saw it as an imperative that they develop means of ensuring that the farming population worked harder than before. From 1975 onward, all of those Cambodians who are living in rural cooperatives, meaning the vast majority of Cambodia's population, were reclassified as members of one of 3 groups: the full right members, the candidates, and the depositees. The full right members, most of whom were poor lower middle peasants, were entitled to full ratios and able to hold political posts in the cooperatives and join both the army and the Communist Party. Candidates could still hold low-level administrative positions. The application of this tripartite system was uneven, and it was introduced to different areas at different times. On the ground, the basic societal division remained between the base people and the new people. It was never Pol Pot and the party's intention to exterminate all new people, although the latter were usually treated harshly, and this led to some commentators to believe extermination was the government's desire. Pol Pot instead wanted to double or triple the country's population, hoping it could reach between 15 and 20 million within a decade. In January 1976, a cabinet meeting was held to promulgate a new constitution, declaring that the country was to be renamed Democratic Kampuchea. The constitution asserted state ownership of the means of production, declaring the equality of men and women, and the rights and obligation of all citizens to work. It aligned that the country would be governed by 3-person presidium, and at the time Pol Pot and Khmer Rouge leaders expected that Sihanouk would take one of these roles. Sihanouk was nevertheless increasingly uncomfortable with the new government, and in March he resigned his role as the head of state. Pol Pot tried repeatedly but unsuccessfully to get him to change his mind. Sihanouk asked to be allowed to travel to China, citing the need for medical treatment, but this was denied. He was instead kept in his palace, which was sufficiently stocked with goods to allow him a luxurious lifestyle throughout the Khmer Rouge years. The Khmer Rouge also classified people based on their religions and ethnic backgrounds. Under the leadership of Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge had a policy of state atheism. Buddhist monks were viewed as social parasites and designated as special class. Within a year of the Khmer Rouge's victory in their civil war, the country's monks was sent to manual labor in rural cooperatives and irrigation projects. Despite its ideological iconoclasm, many historical monuments were left undamaged by the Khmer Rouge. For Pol Pot's government, like its predecessors, the historical state of Angkor was a key point of reference. Outwardly, relations between Cambodia and Vietnam were warm following the establishment of democratic Kampuchea. After Vietnam was unified in July 1976, the Cambodian government issued a message of congratulations. Privately, relationships between the two were declining. In a speech on the first anniversary of their victory in the Civil War, Q referred to the Vietnamese as imperialists. In May 1976, a negotiation to draw up a formal border between the two countries failed. Ben Kianan estimates that 1.671 million to 1.871 million Cambodians died as a result of Khmer Rouge policy, or between 21% and 24% of Cambodia's 1975 population. A study by French demographer Marek Swinlitsky calculated slightly fewer than 2 million unnatural deaths under the Khmer Rouge out of a 1975 Cambodian population of 7.8 million. 33.5% of Cambodian men died under the Khmer Rouge compared to 15.7% of the Cambodian women. According to a 2001 academic source, the most widely accepted estimates of excess deaths under the Khmer Rouge range from 1.5 million to 2 million. Although figures as low as 1 million and as high as 3 million have been cited, conventionally accepted estimates of deaths due to Khmer Rouge executions range from 500,000 to 1 million, a third of one half of excess mortality during the period. However, a 2013 academic source citing research from 2009 indicates that execution may have accounted for as much as 60% of the total, with 23,745 mass graves containing approximately 1.3 million suspected victims of execution. In December 1976, the Kampuchean Communist Party Central Committee's annual plenum proposed the country's ready itself for the prospect of war with Vietnam. Pol Pot believed that Vietnam was committed to expansionism and thus it was a threat to Cambodian independence. There were renewed border clashes between Cambodia and Vietnam in early 1977, continuing into April. On 30th April, Cambodian units backed by artillery fire entered Vietnam and attacked a series of villages, killing several hundred Vietnamese civilians. Vietnam responded by ordering its air force to bomb Cambodian border positions. Several months later, the fighting resumed. In September, two divisions of the Cambodian Eastern Zone entered the Tre Ny area, Vietnam, where they attacked several villages and slaughtered their inhabitants. That month, Pol Pot traveled to Beijing and from there to North Korea, where Kim Il-sung spoke out against Vietnam in solidarity with the Khmer Rouge. On 25 December 1978, the Vietnamese army launched its full-scale invasion. Its column initially advanced into the northeast Cambodia, taking Kratil on 30th December and Stang Trang on 3rd January. The Vietnamese main force then entered Cambodia on 1st January 1979, heading along Highways 1 and 7 toward Phnom Penh. Cambodia's forward defenses failed to stop them. With an attack on Phnom Penh imminent in January, Pol Pot ordered Sihanouk and his family to be sent to Thailand. The entire diplomatic corps followed shortly after. On January 7th, Pol Pot and other senior government figures left the city and drove to Pasat. They spent 2 days there before being moved to Battambang. In July 1979, Pol Pot established a new headquarters, Office 131, on the western flank of Mont Tom. He dropped the name Pol Pot and began calling himself Fem. In September 1979, Q announced that the Khmer Rouge was establishing a new united front, the Patriotic Democratic Front, bringing together all Cambodians who opposed the Vietnamese occupation. Senior Khmer Rouge members began disavowing the cause of socialism. The group members stopped wearing uniform black outfits. Pol Pot himself started wearing jungle green fatigues and later tie-made safari suits. Short believed that these changes reflected a genuine ideological shift in Khmer Rouge. In October, Pol Pot ordered an end to executions, a command which was largely followed. In November 1979, the United Nations General Assembly voted to recognize Khmer Rouge delegation rather than that of Vietnamese-backed government as the legitimate government of Cambodia. In December, Sampan replaced Pol Pot as Prime Minister of Democratic Kampuchea, a move that allowed Pol Pot to focus on the war effort and which was perhaps also designed to improve the Khmer Rouge's image. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the subsequent end of the Cold War had repercussions for Cambodia. With Soviet Union no longer a threat, the US and its allies no longer saw Vietnamese domination of Cambodia as an issue. The US announced that it no longer recognized the CGDK as the legitimate government of Cambodia at the UN General Assembly. In June, the various Cambodian factions agreed to a ceasefire to be overseen by the United Nations, with the formation of a new Supreme National Council to facilitate the implementation of democratic elections. Pol Pot agreed to these terms, fearing that if he refused, the other factions would all unite against the Khmer Rouge. In November, Sihanouk returned to Cambodia. There, he praised the Vietnamese-backed leader Hun Sen and stated that the Khmer Rouge leaders should be put on trial for their crimes. When Sampan arrived in Phnom Penh with the Khmer Rouge delegation, he was beaten by a mob. Pol Pot had grown suspicious of Son Sen and in June 1997 ordered his assassination. Khmer Rouge cadres subsequently killed Sen and 13 of his family members and aides. Pol Pot later stated that he had not sanctioned all of these killings. Tamok was concerned that Pol Pot could turn on him too. Mook rallied troops loyal to him at Along Veng, informing them that Pol Pot had betrayed their movement and then headed to Kabal and Asang. Fearing Mook's troops, on 12th June, Pol Pot and his family and several bodyguards fled on foot. Pol Pot was very frail and had to be carried. After Mook's troops apprehended him, Pol Pot was placed under house arrest. Khieu Samphan and Anu Chair sided with Mook.